Okay, today we're going to watch the American Battlefield Trust's video of Vicksburg, the Siege of Vicksburg. Question I have for you guys. When it comes to the end of the Civil War, what had more influence? Was it the Siege of Vicksburg or was it the Battle of Gettysburg? Both happened at the same time, but I'm curious. There's some debate about that. But in the meantime, let's watch the American Battlefield Trust animated map. They do a great job with these things. I highly recommend you check them out. The link's down below in the description. Yeah, let's get started. What production value. I love this.
By the end of the Civil War's second year, Union forces in the West controlled much of the Mississippi River, except for one vital stretch. Few Northern boats tested the strong Confederate river batteries at Port Hudson or at Vicksburg, known as the Gibraltar of the Confederacy. President Abraham Lincoln claimed Vicksburg the key to winning the Civil War. But by late 1862, Union naval efforts there had failed. That key remained firmly in Southern hands. Using the Mississippi River and its major tributaries to move men and munitions, the Union Army had won a series of victories in the West, and they hadn't done it alone.
Yeah, it's important to note the amount of help. I shouldn't say help, but the key that the Brown Water Navy helped with. I think it was a Farragut. He worked with Grant. They weren't competing by any means. They worked together for a common goal. And that's something that I'm going to say quite honestly, you rarely see in the Civil War. With that Navy, I mean, once Fort Henry and Donelson are taken, it just opens up Kentucky, Kentucky, Tennessee, Nashville, and all the way down the Mississippi River. And then if you look at in the South, you've got the fall of New Orleans, you get the fall of Baton Rouge, and then you've got two ports that end up becoming left. And the Mississippi River, you're missing a good chunk of it, and you can only get supplies across from I guess it's called the Trans-Mississippi Theater on the west. Not the west as we know it now. That's more like South Midwest. But it would be Texas, Arkansas, kind of Oklahoma, western Louisiana. And the supplies from there are really important. There's just a lot of goods that are being made, and once this does fall, this is just, some people do say that once it's done, that's it. You can't get those supplies, and that's just it.
In late 1861, the U.S. War Department had rapidly built a fleet of ironclad river boats never before seen in warfare. By late 1862, this brown water navy and Major General Ulysses S. Grant's army set their sights on the city that Confederate President Jefferson Davis claimed was the nailhead that held the South's two halves together.
Davis's home was actually just south, I believe, of Vicksburg.
With most of the South's ports blockaded by Union ships, Vicksburg's connection to the Trans-Mississippi region made it critical to the Confederacy's very survival. Texas beef and Louisiana sugar, salt, and molasses fed the Southern armies. Lead from Missouri filled Southern rifles, and it all funneled through Vicksburg's rail lines. The defense of Vicksburg and Port Hudson fell to Lieutenant General John Pemberton, who was a Pennsylvanian by birth, but sided with the South at the urging of his wife, a Virginian.
Yeah, a lot of people in the South were extremely weary of Pemberton and where his loyalties lie. As a matter of fact, he was sent out west which wasn't the best. It was sort of like I think on the Civil War Breakfast Club, if you watch them, called the Land of the Misfit Toys. It's sort of where everyone kind of gets sent, to a certain extent. So, Pemberton wasn't, he wasn't, sort of like untrustworthy, or, they just weren't 100% sure about him.
With little combat experience, his orders are to hold Vicksburg at all costs. In late 1862, Grant began his campaign for Vicksburg with a two-pronged strike, intending to lure Confederate forces from Vicksburg with the first prong, while the second, commanded by Major General William Sherman, struck at the city's lightly held defenses. But Confederate cavalry hit first, cutting Grant's long supply line, forcing him to fall back and allowing Confederates to shift men by rail to defeat Sherman's attacks at Chickasaw Bayou in late December. Grant spends a winter and early spring.
I should say that the supply lines in the West were humongous. You needed them. You needed them no matter what. And this begins foreshadowing things along the lines of the March to the Sea, living off the land, total war, that kind of stuff. Supply lines are such a huge deal, and trying to figure out how to deal with harassing cavalry and things like that becomes a major issue that they have to overcome.
Spring of 1863, trying a variety of routes to Vicksburg, each ending in failure.
Yep.
Yet amidst growing public cries...
By the way, there were I believe, five different attempts to get down to Vicksburg. So it certainly wasn't from lack of trying.
To replace him, and against the advice of his closest advisors, Grant grew bolder, embarking upon the largest amphibious campaign in American history up to that time.
And it's true, a lot of people did try to replace Grant. Lincoln was one of the few proponents of Grant. Again, like, not spare this man, he fights, that kind of thing. Shiloh at this point still really wasn't necessarily seen as a victory for the Union. It was seen more as a defeat for Grant. The newspapers had a huge amount of influence, just like social media does today. Right or wrong, you can change a narrative or create a narrative, and the newspapers are very good at that. And when you get someone like Grant, who is not an outgoing, defending, kind of person of himself, he is very much, nose to the grindstone kind of person. You can get, one bad battle and you're out. It seems to be the way things are going by 1862, especially the end of 1862. Look at how many commanders they went through in the East. But yeah, Grant Halleck actually, I think, didn't really support Grant much at all, if I'm not mistaken. He was sort of indifferent, and then kind of kept him along, and Sherman stood up for him. But yeah. So what are you going to do? And plus, when he was out west before the war, he got a very... I won't say... There's debate about his drinking reputation. What we would call like a binge drinker these days. Someone who could sort of start and stop, but when they started, boy, did they go. Also, he was kind of like a lightweight drinker, too. It was a reputation that actually got him almost kicked out of the Army. He ended up resigning, but... Grant has a very checkered past of a lot of failures and a lot of bad luck. People say he was a failure, but in reality, he was a very kind of trusting person. That was his nature, and there was bad luck too, and there were some bad decisions, absolutely. So.
In late March, Grant orders Major General John McClernand's 13th Corps to improve the route across Louisiana's swampy river bottoms. Out of the reach of Vicksburg's big guns, the Union force would then be ferried across the mighty river and onto Mississippi soil. Grant's plan is intricate, risky. Success hinges on Admiral David Porter's fleet of gunboats and troop transports, which on the night of April 16th make a daring race past the Vicksburg batteries, hugging the riverbank below to withstand their fire. Even with Porter's fleet south of Vicksburg, Grant continues to keep Pemberton guessing.
Those bluffs at Vicksburg, if you've ever been, they are extremely high. And one of the hard things to do is it's very defensible. It's very hard to get the guns angled down, but it was very lucky that he got through the way he did. It was I think it was something like a quarter of the force was lost. Don't quote me on that, even though it's on record. But don't quote me necessarily on that. But he got a lot of supplies through. The other thing that's important about this, the kickoff of this last expedition, and it will be the final one, and the winning one, is that they say that fortune favors the bold. Well, again, Grant tried 5 different times. He said he found 5 different ways that he can't succeed. And this one is a very intricate plan. He's able to execute it quite well and adjust on the fly, which this is a great quality in a commander. And this is still studied today.
As to where he'll attack. On April 17th, the day after Porter's daring run, Grant launches a federal cavalry raid into the heart of Mississippi. On April 29th, Sherman feints an attack north of Vicksburg, while Union gunboats shell Grand Gulf, where Grant actually plans to ferry his army across the Great River. The cavalry raid ties up Pemberton's cavalry, leaving river crossings unguarded. Sherman's feint draws Confederate attention north of the city.
Isn't that amazing? Confusion, sleight of hand kind of thing. That cavalry raid was fantastic, using Sherman as bait, having a trusted subordinate, or if you want to say just coworker, is really all that is all that was needed here. But I shouldn't say that so lightly, because it was certainly hard won for the both of them. But this is fantastic.
Both keep Pemberton distracted from the true threat at Grand Gulf. The batteries there were too strong for Union gunboats, so Grant adapts and crosses instead at Bruinsburg. By April 30th, Grant realizes a goal he had toiled 6 months to achieve. The lead element of his army is on the Confederate side of the river. For the next 17 days, his army would march more than 200 miles and fight 5 battles in a campaign never before witnessed on American soil.
It's very comparable to Jackson and what he did in the Valley. Not, just comparable.
Moving inland, up steep bluffs, marched the soldiers of McClernand's Corps. In the early morning hours of May 1st, they hit a Confederate brigade. For the next 17 hours, up to 8,000 Confederates put up a noble defense in the rugged terrain surrounding Fort Gibson, holding back 20,000 Federals. By late afternoon, outflanked and low on ammunition, the Confederates fall back. The loss here causes the Confederate evacuation of Grand Gulf on May 2nd. With his beachhead secure, Grant's plan truly unfolds. Now, aware of Grant's true intentions, Pemberton assumes he will march north for Vicksburg. But Grant has already rejected that approach as too restrictive. Instead, using the Big Black River as a shield, he plans to cut the rail line which feeds Vicksburg with supplies and reinforcements. Then he will turn and trap Pemberton at Vicksburg. It was this type of bold, indirect strategy that would become the hallmark of Grant's military career.
That's brilliant.
By May 12th, joined by Sherman's Corps, Grant marches along a 10-mile front, aiming to attack the Southern Railroad the next morning. Pemberton.
Sherman, close friend of Grant's, extremely capable. McPherson, Bubsy McPherson, one of their a great friend and great general. When he was killed, was it on the March to the Sea or towards Atlanta? It was a terrible thing. They said it was one of the few times that I think Sherman said he wept. But and then McClernand. Well, he was kind of a political guy, political general. So, not a bad army altogether, but he wasn't the worst. He really wasn't the worst. There were a lot of political generals. Some people, like you get people like Dan Sickles. Some people in the past, of course, they've vilified Sickles for what he did at Gettysburg. But the fact of the matter is he did rise to corps commander. All right, he wasn't just placed on top of a corps; he rose to corps commander. And, he wasn't necessarily stupid. He was outgoing and, kind of a nutty person, but you kind of need that in politics. But if you think about it, he was the only political corps commander at Gettysburg. And, you could argue, if you ever go to the Battle of Gettysburg and you look around, what he did wasn't such a bad idea. But it's neither here nor there. There were political people. That were in high positions, and you kind of needed that to keep the war going. It's one of those necessary evils. And did it prolong the war? Absolutely, I think it did. It's a great argument you could make to say that it prolonged the war. But then again, you have other people who were West Point trained that did not do a good job, and it's just the way it goes. So
Shifts his army and rushes a Confederate brigade by rail to Jackson with orders to strike Grant's right flank.
Yeah, Johnson was called out to save the situation. Not a favorite by Davis by a long shot, but he was called out by Davis, and he was just like, he did not have much of anything in terms of forces, and he did not. Even Johnson, I believe he was a great defensive general. I really do. One of the top ones, and he was just like, I don't think we can salvage the situation. But the orders are orders.
These 3,000 Confederates slam into Major General James McPherson's 10,000 men along the banks of 14 Mile Creek, just southwest of Raymond. Unaware that they are outnumbered 3-1, Confederates launch a fierce attack. After almost 6 hours, McPherson's artillery and numeric advantage has the rebels retreating to Jackson. Realizing he can't safely march on Vicksburg with a large body of Confederates now at his rear, Grant wields 2/3 of his army toward the state capital. He cuts rail and telegraph lines along the way and hinders communication between Pemberton and the one man sent to assist him.
Look at that. He split his army up. I mean, not too far, but only, one of the rules is don't divide your army in the face of an enemy. Of course, in this particular circumstance, he had, I would say, 2.5 corps commanders that really knew their stuff. I guess I'm not sure if they were corps commanders at this point. I have to double check that. 3 wings, I would say, wing commanders. McPherson and Sherman were certainly capable. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Pretty interesting. He's very bold and reacts well.
On the night of May 13th, General Joe Johnston, the hero of 1st Manassas, arrives at Jackson to take charge of the grim Confederate predicament in Mississippi. Within hours, even as his reinforcements near Jackson, Johnston wires the authorities in Richmond that he is too late and orders the city evacuated. The next morning, Sherman and McPherson's divisions pushed back Confederate artillery and roadblocks from a handful of Confederate regiments. By late afternoon on May 14th, the United States flag flies once again over the state capitol.
There is another thing to know about Grant, is that a lot of the generals here knew each other from the Mexican-American War. Grant was one of the things that he excelled at, that General, I believe it was Winfield Scott, or was it Taylor, knew, was that Grant learned logistics. He didn't fight like everyone else did. He wasn't one of the officer corps, part of the officer corps that fought a lot, but he was in charge of logistics. And a lot of people said that this is one of the key elements that commanders forget or don't understand quite well. He knew it extremely well. You look at how many battles he has ended up fighting, how he's able to keep his army supplied, keep the communication going. The logistical situation is a nightmare. But for Grant, he has the capability.
Grant spares none of his men to occupy Jackson and put its military supplies and rail lines to the torch. Then he turns his army toward Vicksburg. As Jackson burned, Pemberton had moved with 20,000 men to attack Grant's supply line. Without a working telegraph, Confederate communications unraveled. As Johnston gathers reinforcements to the northeast, Pemberton moves southeast. On May 16th, Pemberton receives a 2-day-old message from Johnston, ordering him to Clinton. As Pemberton reverses his column, Grant closes in. Pemberton hastily deploys his divisions along a 3-mile front to face 2 advancing Federal columns, but he is unaware of a third moving toward his exposed left flank. Brigadier General Stephen Lee of Stevenson's division shifts his brigade to a hill owned by Sid Champion. Brigadier General Alfred Cummings' Georgians moved to fill a gap and block the Union division's closing on the Middle Road. And at 10:30 that morning at Champion Hill, Grant starts the battle, destined to seal Vicksburg's eventual fate. If Pemberton's thin left flank crumbles, Grant will control the Baker's Creek Bridge and Pemberton's escape route to Vicksburg. Seth Barton's Georgia Brigade hustles to stop the Union onslaught. By 11:30 a.m., the fighting on Champion Hill turns viciously hand-to-hand, with Stevenson's division eventually thrown back to the Jackson Road. Major General John Bowen's division savagely drives the Federals back to the Champion House. But a second Federal assault overwhelms them. Reinforcements led by Major General William Loring arrive too late, and Bowen's men fall back. Their retreat turns to panic as Grant's divisions converge. Their main escape route now cut off. Pemberton's men had managed to construct a second bridge, which they used to retreat to Edwards, though not before Grant's army is able to strand Loring on the east side of Baker's Creek. Out of communication with Pemberton, and believing Grant has already taken Edwards, Loring orders his vital 8,000-man division to Jackson and away from the defenses at Vicksburg. Unaware of Loring's decision, Pemberton waits for him that night in the fortification at the Big Black River Bridge. Instead, he is met the next morning by McClernand's corps, which...
Okay, so they were core. That's what I thought. But I gotta say, I was always surprised that Loring was able to get away. That he wasn't fought out, I guess. But he made it to Jackson. Loring is a slippery guy.
Immediately attack and send the rebels running to the safety of Vicksburg. The battles at Champion Hill and Big Black River cost Pemberton dearly. 25% of his army, 45 cannon, and the faith of his men. 30 years ago to the day, Pemberton had accepted a cadetship to West Point. As he rode back to Vicksburg, he notes, and today that career is ended in disaster and disgrace. Grant's trap is now set.
It's amazing. Great sound effects, by the way.
On May 17th, Pemberton's demoralized soldiers, reeling from the loss at Big Black River, began streaming into the city. They worked through the night to shore up their fortifications. Vicksburg's land defenses stretched more than 8 miles, with 9 major forts connected by rifle pits, artillery embrasures, and parapets of earthen logs. One such stockade redan guarded the graveyard road leading into Vicksburg. Wanting to avoid a lengthy siege, Grant attacked here on May 19th. After a 5-hour artillery barrage, Sherman goes in, but piles of brush and sharpened tree limbs unravel formations as Confederate crossfire cuts men down in scores. Pinned down, Confederates lob hand grenades into their midst. The Federals used the cover of darkness to fall back to their lines. Almost 1,000 of Grant's men are killed, wounded, or missing. Behind his stout defenses, Pemberton loses only 70. On May 22nd, Grant tries again on a much wider 3-mile front. Only McClernand's corps gains a foothold. He sends Grant a message to keep up the pressure. But they are beaten back and lose another 3,000 men. Grant realizes he has no other choice but to lay siege, ordering his commanders to dig their lines closer to the Confederate trenches.
It's important to know, by 1863, the tactics have, they don't all, the tactics have, the weapons have changed. The tactics have not. Towards the end of the war, more so. Every time an army stops, you'll notice like Lee in the Overland campaign, Robert E. Lee, he's digging in. Every time they stop, dig trenches. The King of Spades, this is the trench warfare that becomes this is a precursor to it right here. Well, this is it, and the same thing happens at Petersburg, which enables Lee to hold that giant amount of the miles and miles on lines. Look at, there's 8 miles of lines here that are being held, and what you'll soon see is the beginning of like a defense in depth with the trenches, and it's just it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. Yeah.
By mid-June, they began mining beneath the 3rd Louisiana Redan, and on June 25th, the Federals explode 2,200 pounds of black powder. Soldiers from both sides pour into the crater, fighting for more than 20 hours before Grant calls off the attacks. By July 6th, the Federals will be prepared to detonate 13 more mines. But
they did this in World War I, Petersburg, and they don't always work. But World War I was famous for this kind of stuff. Digging mines, I mean.
It will not be necessary. For 47 days, soldiers and Vicksburg citizens endure a constant night.
That's an important point. They were ready to blow I guess it was 13 different spots around the line for an assault. So this 47-day siege, could have ended. Maybe just a little later if the Confederates are able to hold out.
Day and night, up to 220 cannon blast the southern defenses from the land as Porter's gunboats shelled Vicksburg's batteries from the river. Citizens took to living in hillside caves for shelter. Food and water grow scarce. As disease flourishes, medical supplies dwindle. Every public building and many homes are now hospitals. Wagons make daily rounds to pick up the dead. Rebel soldiers' rations are by now a handful of peas and rice and a single cup of water per day. Sickness and desertion leave fewer men on the front lines. One day in late June, a notice slid under the door of Pemberton's headquarters. It reads, "If you can't feed us, surrender us." Signed, many soldiers. Following a dire report from his subordinates that his army lacks the strength to make a breakout attack, on July 2nd, Pemberton realizes he has no choice. He must surrender.
Yeah, you understand the situation. I mean, there's no supply coming across the river, nothing coming across the land. It's 1863 already, so it's you're not getting a whole. You're getting supply, but it's going to where it's really needed, and it's harsh. And you're talking shelling day and night. And there would be like intervals just so they couldn't sleep. They did dig in absolutely into the cliffs and and hills, and I believe you can. I don't know if you can see them today if they're still there, but yeah, people were living in the side of earthworks just because the city was being shelled, eating rats. Disease. I mean, oh man, that was a killer. And while this is going on, Grant is said to have been drinking again, which I guess it depends on who you talk to is a problem, depending on who you talk to. As a matter of fact, Grant had somebody that was assigned to him. I can't remember his name. Raymond? I can't remember. He was supposed to keep him from drinking. He was like his chaperone.
On July 3rd, 1863, there came a sound, ominous for some, for weeks unheard by all. Silence. That day, Grant and Pemberton meet to discuss terms of surrender. With the anniversary of American independence only a day away, Pemberton hopes Grant will be in a generous mood. Instead, Grant demands unconditional surrender. Pemberton refuses. Later that evening, Grant offers terms. Instead of taking Pemberton's army prisoner, he will parole them. Many will go home at once.
Yeah.
Pemberton accepts, and on the 4th of July, the Confederates stack arms, handing over the city of Vicksburg to the Union forces.
Amazing.
The South's Gibraltar had fallen. With the capture of Port Hudson, 5 days later, the Mississippi River is entirely in Union hands.
General Banks did that. Famous for the Red River Campaign and for also being beaten, I believe, by Jackson in the Valley Campaign in '62, early '62. And yeah, that's a lot of people don't remember that or don't realize that when Grant, took Vicksburg, the Mississippi wasn't open yet. I mean, Port Hudson was still actually being sieged by Banks, but you've got this news coming out all over the place. This is why it doesn't get any. Why would you think about this when all of a sudden the one place, Vicksburg, that you've been trying to get for, a year, almost a year, and that falls the day after the Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, it's secondhand news, but he did it, and it should be noted.
Hands. Grant loses 10,000 killed, wounded, or missing, and inflicts nearly as many losses on the Confederates. But aided by Porter's fleet, he disperses an entire rebel army and cuts the South supply line. Soon, even the most basic goods like salt to preserve meat would grow increasingly scarce. Yet the Vicksburg campaign is overshadowed in the press by the Confederate defeat at Gettysburg the day before. And only in the coming decades would Grant's accomplishment be recognized. Late into the 20th century, coalition forces in the First Gulf War were still using tactics inspired by Grant's Vicksburg campaign.
Still studied today. It's crazy. But what a mind that guy had.
And it was at Vicksburg that the blue and the gray found unity in the cause of preservation. Their efforts resulted in the establishment of the Vicksburg National Military Park in 1899.
Can't believe it took that long.
Today, that preservation effort continues.
Oh, they have the Cairo. That's awesome.
So that the sacrifices made there by both sides will not be forgotten.
Narrator's got a great voice. I love it. They did such a fascinating job. It's such a great job. That's wonderful. Well, what do you guys think of the Vicksburg campaign? If you ask me, I mean, I really do think it was overshadowed. I think first and foremost, to be quite honest with you, my analysis is that that Grant never really had anything handed to him. He worked for a lot. And the Battle of Gettysburg, when it comes to that, I mean, they were in Pennsylvania. There was a second invasion of the North. So there were only two major invasions of the North. And that was the second one, and they were stopped. And, well, despite what you may think, it was a fantastic victory for the Union, but it was extremely, extremely costly. And when it comes to Vicksburg, I would say that's not only was it skill and tenacity and planning. I mean, this is hard work. When you look at time spent trying to come up with different ways of creating avenues to achieve your goal, this is it right here. Grant is very, very good at that. If you look at Meade, and I will never, disparage Meade, because first and foremost, it must be known that Meade was given command something like 6 days or something like that before the Battle of, someone will correct me in the comments, before the Battle of Gettysburg. So, he had like a conference with Joe Hooker, who was the commander of the AOP, the Army of the Potomac, and then he immediately fought the Battle of Gettysburg. So you've got to understand that's just amazing. And the fact that the Union Army was actually in worse shape than the Confederate Army when it comes to Gettysburg. I mean, they, split just to get to Gettysburg, where the Confederates were. So it was in terms of a battle, yes, it was extremely significant. In terms of logistics and the fall of the Confederacy, I tend to argue more towards Vicksburg. They both happen at the same time. and it cuts it in half. From here on in, I think it's Edmund Kirby Smith goes over and tries to and runs the Trans-Mississippi Theater. There's a Red River campaign. There are a couple of excursions that go on, and things like that in the Trans-Mississippi Theater, but not a whole lot. They're sort of cut off and left to rot in a way. And right after this, I would say, what was it, about a year or so, maybe not even a year or so after this, the march towards Atlanta happens, and then the march towards the sea. Honestly, the Confederacy is already done, and that's just the way it is. Let me know your thoughts. Put it in the comments. I'm really interested. Thanks again for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I love it. I love this stuff. And let me know if you think that you have a video you want me to react to. That'd be great. Or if you have any comments. Thank you.